Hello everyone, my name is Shambhavi. Hope you all are doing well. Now, basically, today we are going to discuss about the decision and the conclusion in the hypothesis testing. Right now, this will be the last topic for the hypothesis testing. After that, we are going to practice some of the questions, but to the theoretical part, the decision and conclusion is the last part for this hypothesis testing topic. Right, let me just first of all go on to the previous slide where we had just studied about the rare events a little bit, right? The last topic which we have discussed was the rare events. Now, what we had discussed about in this particular topic, so that we had made an assumption about the property of the population. Then basically what you gather out the sample data randomly. And if that sample data has properties, that would be very unlikely to occur if the assumption is true. Then you would basically conclude that your assumption about the population is probably incorrect, right? The assumption I just mentioned, that as assumption when you are just saying this thing, so it is actually an assumption only. It's not a fact. Okay, it may be true or it may not be true. This is a thing that can come here in between, right? Other than that, we had taken an example in which we had studied about the rare events, right? Now, we're just not going to repeat out that example because that was a quite large example. So if you just want to have a look over that, you can just again go to the previous video. Right, so now today's topic that we are going to discuss today, let me just put out the heading here, that is decision and conclusion. Now, after performing out the hypothesis testing, after finding out the rare events, after doing all of these things, the main thing that comes here and that stays here is the decision and the conclusion, right? Now, how to make out that what is the decision that we should take for this particular question and how to conclude out that particular question, right? This is what we are going to see now. Okay, let me just take out a different color and so that we can just start writing out here. And okay, let me go on to this one. And here basically we go. Right, now basically what I would just do, I would just start writing that a systematic. So basically for making a decision, we have several conditions that I'll be just telling you right now only. Okay, so a systematic way to make a decision, a decision. Oh, okay, just let me write out the correct spelling for the decision. So that is like this. Okay. So a correct way to make a decision of whether. Now, what is the condition for which we make out a decision? We make out a decision that we need to reject the null hypothesis, or basically what we just need to do with that. This is what we make out a decision for, right? So a systematic way to make a decision of whether to reject or not reject. Okay, let me write that reject downside or not reject the null hypothesis, because this is the only case where we just make out some decisions, right? In the null hypothesis, because in this only we need to decide that do we need to reject or we do not need to reject, or what we need to do out here, right? So a systematic way to make a decision of whether to reject or not reject the null hypothesis is okay, let me come down so that I can just get a blank space for writing. Fine. So this is to compare the p-value or you can yeah, it is basically for comparing out the p. Let me remove out that or from here. So yes, on basis of this only we just make out a decision, right? That we compare out the null hypothesis with the p-value, and then only we just make out a decision that whether we need to reject that out or we do not need to reject that out, right? This is what we actually do here. So to compare the p-value, after this, okay, now I'll be putting out some conditions here. Now, before that, there is one term which I just want you to introduce, and that term is actually preset. That is preset. So let me write that preset, and let me even put out a highlighter here so that this you can get to know that is the topic which we are discussing. Right, now this is one term which comes here, that is preset. Now after this I would be explaining you that what does this preset actually mean here, right? So preset, what is it actually? So I would just write here a preset, P-R-E, that is P-R-E, a preset. We just call it as alpha, we just denote it by as alpha, okay? So a preset alpha is the probability. I'm simply writing the PROB and then dot. This is actually probability. I'm just simply writing out the short form, okay? So a preset alpha is the probability of a type 1 error, of a type one error, that is basically rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. This was a type 1 error, right? Rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. This was what about the type 1 error, right? So a preset alpha is a probability of a type 1 error. It may or may not be given to you. It may or may not be given to you at the beginning of the problem. So basically here the preset which we are talking about, that is an alpha. That is basically alpha is the probability of a type 1 error, right? That we actually know. So that probability is even called as a preset as well, right? Now second thing comes that it may be given or it may not be given to us in the beginning of the question or beginning of the problem which we are actually getting here. Right, now we just come down here and let me just put out the ways for making out a decision. Right, I would just write that when you make a decision, decision like this. Okay, so when you make a decision to reject, when you make a decision to reject or not reject H naught, that is basically my null hypothesis, right? So do as follows. So whenever we just make out some decision to reject or not to reject, in that case I mean we had some conditions, right, that we actually put out here. So let me just define out that conditions a little bit here that we put out, that if do we just want to reject out the null hypothesis or we do not have to do. Right, let me come to a new line here and let's start writing out. So my first point goes, put out the first point and let's write here that if A, that is not A, that is my alpha. Okay, this is the alpha. You can just call it as type 1 error or you can just call it as preset. Okay, so if alpha is greater than the p value, okay, my first condition, that if alpha is greater than p value, then reject H naught. Then in that case, reject H naught. H naught means my null hypothesis, right? This is my very first condition that comes into role, that if alpha is greater than the p value, then reject out the H naught, my null hypothesis. Right? Now, what is the result of the sample if it is get some condition like this? So I would just write the result. Okay, the result of the sample data are significant. Okay, if you just get out some sample data like this, the result for that sample data are significant. Right? Now, there is basically sufficient evidence to conclude that H naught is an incorrect belief that the alternative hypothesis HA may be correct. Right? Let me write out that thing because it is a very important line for this particular topic. Right? Let me write out that thing. So, I would just write here the sufficient evidence to conclude sufficient evidence to conclude that H naught is an incorrect belief, that H naught is an incorrect belief, that H naught is an incorrect belief. So basically and then we have the null hypothesis and we have secondly the alternative hypothesis as well, right? And then the alternative hypothesis, that is HA. H and here A, right? And then the alternative hypothesis HA may be correct. Right? This is the first condition that actually applies out here, right? This is the very first thing that applies out here. Let me just take the scroller here and let's see it. So when you, if alpha is greater than p value, reject H naught. The result of the sample data are significant. The sufficient evidence to conclude that H naught is an incorrect belief, and then the alternative hypothesis HA may be correct. This is the very first condition. Okay. Right. Now let's come to a new line, and now here my second condition starts out. So my second condition starts that if alpha is less, okay, let me write alpha first of all clearly. If alpha is less than or equal to p value, my second condition goes like this, okay, that if alpha is less than or equal to p value, then do not reject, then do not reject H naught. Okay, if this is the condition, then do not reject H naught. Now basically the result of the sample data are not significant. In the above condition they were significant, right? But here in this condition the results of that are not significant. So basically there is insufficient evidence to conclude that the alternative hypothesis, that is HA, may be correct. So I would just write the last line only, okay? Insufficient. So basically there is insufficient. SUFFI right here. So insufficient evidence to conclude insufficient evidence to conclude that the alternative hypothesis, hypothesis. So okay, if alpha is less than or equal to the p value, do not reject H naught. So in that case, it can be concluded that insufficient evidence to conclude that the alternative hypothesis, that is HA, may be correct. Right? This is the second the second decision which we actually have. Right? So, okay, now what happens when you do not reject out the H naught? What actually happens, right? So when you basically do not reject the H naught, it does not mean that you should believe that H naught is true. Please listen to my words very much carefully, because I'm just not going to write out that thing. So whenever you do not reject H naught, so in that case, it does not mean that you should believe that H naught value is true. It simply means, basically the condition which I mentioned, that simply means that the sample data have failed to provide the sample data has failed to provide the sufficient evidence to cast serious doubt about the truthfulness of H naught. Okay, it's not the case that if you are not basically if you do not reject the H naught, so H naught is true. No, it's not at all true. The only condition can be that if H naught is true, so in that case you should simply mean that the sample data, the data which I have taken actually, that has actually failed out to provide the sufficient evidence to doubt about the H naught. Okay, this is all. It does not mean that H naught value is actually true. No, I told you that thing 2 times. I'm just not going to repeat that third time. Okay, just listen to my words very carefully, as I mentioned in the starting as well. What conclusion you can give out here? What conclusion we can give out from here? So conclusion is, after you make your decision, after you make out your decision, write a thoughtful conclusion, write out a thoughtful conclusion about the hypothesis in terms of the given problem. Right? This is the conclusion which you can make, that after you make your decision, write out a thoughtful conclusion about the hypothesis in terms of the given problem. This is how you should write out the conclusion. Right? So this is whole about decision and conclusion, right? That is systematic way to make a decision of whether to reject or not reject a null hypothesis is to compare the p-value. that is, we have even preset as well. So a preset alpha is the probability of a type 1 error. It may or may not be given to you at the beginning of the problem. When you make out a decision to reject or not reject H naught, do as follows. If alpha is greater than p value, reject the H naught. The result of the sample data are significant. The sufficient evidence to conclude that H naught is an incorrect belief, and then our alternative hypothesis HA may be correct. And if alpha is less than or equal to p values, do not reject H naught. Insufficient evidence to conclude that the alternative hypothesis HA may be correct. And the conclusion which you can make is, after you make your decision, write out a thoughtful conclusion about the hypothesis in terms of the given problem. Right? This is how you should do the thing. This is how you should proceed with the things in making out the decision and in making out the conclusion. Right? I hope I just made this thing very much clear to you, how to make out the decisions and how to make out the conclusion. Right? So this is all for this video. Till then, thank you and take care.